Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. I am thrilled to welcome Staci Williams Seeley. She is a principal at DRG Talent and somebody that I really turn to when it comes to board governance. And let me tell you, this is a conversation around board governance is something that I feel like I'm having that conversation on a regular basis. Like there's just a lot of people trying to figure out what are the best pathways, what are the best ways to approach board governance, education, all the things. So really excited about today's episode because we're going to dig into all of that. But before we do, Staci, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm thrilled too. And we're going to get into a whole bunch of really interesting stuff in just a second. But before we do, can you introduce yourself and the work you do now at DRG Talent?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm currently based outside Boston, and I have been working in and on behalf of schools from pre-K to college, day and boarding as a faculty member, an administrator on senior leadership teams, and now as a leadership search consultant for 35 years. I've also served as a trustee on several boards of independent schools and one college, and I've been doing that since 1997. So the consistency in my resume is board service. And some would say that is a special version of no good deed goes unpunished. I have also been a frontline fundraiser, a grant writer, and a liaison to boards of New York City charter schools. So I've been in the public school space as well, helping to evolve their governance. And I also founded and supported a couple of young professional junior boards. And it would be great to talk some other time about board service and board leadership and what we're facing, I think, in terms of the generational shift too. My children attended independent schools from nursery through boarding high school, and I've been fortunate to serve on the boards of schools that they attended. So as a parent, past parent, and also as a chair. My spouse is a senior administrator and former head of school, and one of our children is finishing up her 4th year as an early career independent school teacher. So we're super proud of her. I did not attend independent schools for more than a year here or there, and I arrived in New England to attend college without having a clue about the culture of prep schools, any sport other than football, basketball, or baseball, or track. And I really didn't know much about advanced placement courses. We did not have them at my high school. And it's now a world in which I'm deeply planted and one to which I have relentlessly committed to supporting, changing and evolving through board service, leadership search, and organizational consulting and coaching. DRG Talent, where I'm now working as a consulting firm that serves the mission-driven sector. We help our clients tackle complex leadership and organizational challenges by placing exceptional leaders, strengthening teams, and designing strategies to advance the mission forward. DRG's work emphasizes leadership culture, governance, and organizational capacity as key drivers of strategic execution. And 40 years ago, at its founding, DRG was a really small boutique executive search firm serving nonprofit organizations only in New York. And from there, it's grown exponentially. We're now a majority women-owned business and a team of more than 40 consultants in 17 states across the United States. Education is one of a few sectors within nonprofits that we serve. And along with Jennifer Fleischer, whose 25-year career in schools is such a fantastic complement to the skills and experience that I bring, we are focused on leading our independent schools practice together and growing it in ways that best serve our schools now. And as someone who has supervised 5 heads of school and 5 heads of school and a college president and 2 heads of school as a board chair, I've had a seat at the table as leaders and boards confront unforeseen governance challenges, certainly within the last decade, that both threaten our model and yet present tremendous opportunity for independent schools to thrive. So this is a topic I love talking about. I never get tired of talking about it, and I'm so happy to be here to discuss it with you.
Oh, I'm excited too, and I just you were talking about your career and your experiences. You've got such an interesting vantage point when it comes to looking at boards. You served as board chair. You've been working with boards on search work for a while. So when you look at a board, what are some of the things that you see where boards tend to struggle? Like, I love to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have seen the most thoughtful, innovative, bold thinking, and execution flourish in crisis. The strongest boards are built for resilience and endurance. And in those cases, I would say the board chair in particular must be both steady at the helm and an unfaltering cheerleader for the school and its leadership, especially in times of crisis. A deep listener and a disciplined brand ambassador. So you have to be talking and listening at the same time. Um, you do this both for the board itself, because the board members are looking to the chair for leadership. They're taking all their signals from the chair, and every word you say is carefully parsed and analyzed. Um, the school community as well. You're doing it for the school community, of which the board is a subset. The board members are parents. They are past parents. They are community members. And so it's important to think about your board as part of the school community when you're addressing the school community. Recognizing all these complementary and opposing tenets is critical for board and school leadership. And in my experience, boards often struggle when one or more indicators signal strong tailwinds. A popular head of school. So boards are struggling when they're actually not in crisis and they don't know it. So they're strong tailwinds, right? They've got a popular head of school. They've got waiting lists for enrollment. They're at the close of a successful campaign. And getting to those milestones takes tremendous effort. They've been in struggle. They've been maybe in a bit of a crisis mode. And they get to this plateau. And I can't tell you how many board chairs will say to me at the conclusion of a search, I'm so done. I'm moving on now, right? I've done my work here. And I say, you actually have it, because that head of school really needs your leadership in transition. And so boards get tired, right? Because they are made up of people whose lives and interests change during these periods. A board that takes self-governing and evaluation, continuous trustee education, knowledge of trends, and the trustee pipeline within their own ecosystem, really seriously, looking at those who are ready for leadership. Those boards tend to be the greatest fair weather boards, who are prepared for the next weather system that may challenge them anew.
I love how you said, they're people, right? And they can get tired, and they've got a lot of things going on in their lives. One of the things, like, we had obviously had conversations about this before. So something that's always really stuck with me is that you've talked about how most board members genuinely, like, they want to help, right? They are not taking this role unless they want to serve the school well. Like, it's a
Mhm.
real, it's a true responsibility. But often they're not exactly sure what they're bound to as a trustee. Like, what are their set of roles and responsibilities? And so I guess the question is, how common is that gap?
Yeah.
And what does it cost a school if it goes unaddressed?
Yeah, right. Well, so there's so many responsibilities that a board member is undertaking. They have legal responsibilities or statutory responsibilities. They have to follow and amend as necessary their own bylaws and the laws governing nonprofit organizations within their state. They have fiduciary responsibility, which is to ensure that the budget, the spending, the asset management operations are sound and accountable, accurate, as well as their own individual financial lives. They have to govern those with care, ensuring that their conflicts of interest statements are signed annually, and they also are declaring loyalty to the organization. They have to maintain confidentiality, which is a really, really hard one, and we can dive into more of what that means and what's at risk if they don't.
Yeah.
They have to hire, supervise, evaluate, and if necessary, separate from the head of school, and ensure that their work is strategic and not focused on daily operations, such as the oversight of other employees, uh, whether that's implicit or explicit, or any outcomes affecting individual students. Those are really the top um, roles and responsibilities for board members. But within everything that I shared, Peter, there's a ton of complexity, and it's critical that new trustee orientation, and ongoing trustee education are at the forefront of the board's work.
I know you like to show new leaders the NAIS principles of good practices, and then kind of step back and watch their reaction. What
Yes.
tends to surprise people the most?
Yeah.
What do you, and do you feel like there's opportunity to kind of dig deeper into these sorts of recommendations, things like that?
Yeah. Well, I'm very appreciative of NAIS and their principles of good practice in many areas of school life, but the ones for trustees are extremely important. And there are principles of good practice both for boards as a whole and for individual trustees. So they are extensive, and they are every word is carefully placed. And I think that these resources get a little attention is because it does feel like a little bit of a reading assignment in college, and it's extensive, and it can feel daunting.
Yeah.
And really, I think the way it's worded is to kind of ward off the worst possible scenarios. And so, good practices, I think good priorities, good practices, good policies are worded in positive ways that very support people in delving into the more into trouble, right, into negative areas. So I'm a huge proponent of ongoing trustee education, as I said before, strong orientation programs, mentors for new members, transparency about the board's ongoing work, both to board members and to the larger community, an annual calendar where you know what's coming, but you don't necessarily rinse and repeat, right? So trustees need to know we're in September. Where are we going by May every year? And where are we going that's different than where we went last year, even though we are keeping accordance with, we're following a calendar. Governance committees, if that's how the board is organized, play an important role in supporting the board chair and the next board chair in all of this work. But as I outline those responsibilities above, I think people are just, as I said, surprised by the weight and responsibility that they've signed up for. And those PGPs, those principles of good practice, while they are extraordinarily clear and directive, they are prefaced with this statement, which is what surprises people the most, that says independent schools should be guided by themselves. And should be guided by themselves and not governed by these principles of good practice. So these are ideas, and you should consider following them, but you don't have to. And I think that's really confusing to boards at times. And I think individual board members can say, "Why are we doing this?" NAIS doesn't even say we have to. And so what I think a smart board does is that they take these principles and they apply them to their bylaws, and they make a practice of following and amending them as necessary, so that for the individual trustee, this feels like our independent school is following our best practices, not adhering to some oversight by an association or a body that actually doesn't accredit us.
Because I know you've said that bylaws can, in some ways, act as a syllabus for the board. Like, yeah, expand on that. I mean, I think you just started to go there, but I'm curious. Can you dig a little deeper there?
Yeah, well, sometimes board members have not read their bylaws.
Mm.
They're not even necessarily aware that bylaws exist, or they have been referred to by enough people on the board as, oh, those things that we adopted in whatever year and we haven't looked at since. And it gives folks a sense that they don't matter, but they in fact do. And during an accreditation period, the bylaws, the governance of a school is examined very carefully by the visiting committee, and the bylaws are excavated sometimes for review. Sometimes they are right at the top of a board chair's desk, and honestly, that's where they should live. Boards can be self-perpetuating, Peter, I think, in terms of their membership and their practices. And like our schools, they are often driven by specific relationships that hold lasting cultural resonance, whether they support or sometimes hold back the potential of a school to thrive. And by that, I mean, boards can have major donors, current parents, community or business leaders, and how those folks operate can be self-perpetuating and not necessarily in the best interest of the school, although it appears that way from the outside looking in. And I think that the titles that people hold outside of the boardroom can sometimes have more sway than their primary title, which is board member. If all of that holds true, all the things that I said that can lead a school toward perpetuating its governance in a way that doesn't help the school thrive, as chair, you have a problem. As board chair, you have a really big problem because you've got fellow members who believe they're in their seats as a reward, but with very little responsibility for the work of sustaining the school. And bylaws, orientation, ongoing education, as well as the spirited generative work, which we'll talk about a little bit, I hope, that can head that off at the pass. And when you give people something to do that is meaningful and rewarding, they will take it seriously. If they believe they have been awarded a board seat, there's a natural, I think, there's a natural boredom that can set in. And sometimes people decide, well, this board's not doing what I think it should do, so I'm going to go off and do what I think it should do, and I'm going to act independently. So you can change the culture of a board within a year. If you're the board chair, you can change it within a year. You can change it within a cycle, and by that I mean maybe a 3-year term of a particular board member that really needs to cycle off. By the way, not all boards have terms or term
Right.
limits.
Right.
Should be in the bylaws. And by the way, the head of school is an important partner that we have talked about just in passing, but that person has to be both a committed student and leader of the board's work, both to thrive in their own role and as head, and to sustain the school's mission. They're acting as an ex officio member on all committees, supporting their senior team direct reports, who are both committee liaisons and data experts, and that data better be sound. And they are holding co-responsibility for the stewardship of the board's goals.
So what I heard there was that the chair is really central to being able to make a lot of these things happen, right? And if I heard you correctly, they have to really think deeply about culture and how people are going to work together. So when you've worked with lots of schools, right? Like, so when you think about what separates a chair who's really good at driving that clarity, building culture, versus somebody who's just, there's a process. We want to follow the process, which, don't get me wrong, process is important, but like, what separates what do you find that separates those two?
Yeah, I'm still not sure which one I was, Peter.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was.
That's a
I
really
don't
hard
know if
thing
I
to
was.
answer, right?
What's that?
It's a really hard question to answer.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It is,
yeah,
and I think you have sometimes you're both, right?
yeah,
You have to maintain both of those roles, and I think just transparency and vulnerability to some extent, really asking hard questions about how are we doing as a board and listening to the answer is the
yeah,
hardest thing a chair has to do. I mean, I had the great fortune, and I really mean this, of leading a board through a few really challenging moments: a tuition reset, a head of school search and transition, and the pandemic, all within 4 years.
yeah,
So from 2018 to 2022, I was a chair, and we had to carve out even more clarity in those times of churn, and develop process and policies on the fly at times. We had to separate urgency from importance, and we had to elevate purpose above process. And I think that discipline, that mindset, that sort of the habit of mind that we had to develop really helped to set us up for the success that the school has enjoyed since 2020. We built a runway for, we little. I'll say this: we had little other choice but to support this outgoing leader who had to leave in COVID, who'd done a fantastic job of building us toward that tuition reset and through the first couple of years of it. We had to build a runway for an incoming leader, and we had to prioritize the safety of each member of the community. And in times of a little less tumult, it can be really tempting as a board chair to just review last year's minutes, a couple weeks before an upcoming meeting, and plug and play.
yeah.
Um, but for us, I think, and for the boards I've been on that have really been both successful and future oriented, and I think, again, a good fair weather board that's prepared for the next system. Summer planning for board meetings and retreats well in advance. So if you have a retreat in April, you know what you're gonna, you have a sense of what your retreat's going to be about and what the goals are as early as August. And you can talk to new members about that during orientation and get them excited. Long range financial modeling also goes a long way in helping a board achieve real clarity about what their purpose is, meeting to meeting. Um, Supporting both generative and strategic conversations and not just fiduciary ones, I think is a way to establish clarity as a chair. One of one way of thinking, or one way of having a conversation, is that you're keeping the trains running, right? That's like the fiduciary. And another, the strategic conversation, wonders whether we can improve the trains or if we can operate them in new ways. And I think a generative conversation says, why trains?
Right.
Right. And you need a mix of all three to keep a board engaged and to keep a school that is looking ahead and not standing still, and certainly not trying to reclaim the past, relevant.
Yeah. It's, as you were talking about the board chair role, I started thinking about the head of school role and how isolating it can be to be a head of school. Your board chair is your boss, right? You're managing your leadership team. You're doing all the things that you need to do to run the school. So sometimes it's really hard to find somebody to talk to, which is why I think coaching has become so prevalent in our world, and rightfully so. I think that it's really important. But something I've never thought about until just now is like, who does a board chair turn to? Because I imagine there's a lot of the similar dynamics there. Like, what is that? What would that look like, or what could it look like?
Yeah, so I'm a very active past board chair, and the board chair who succeeded me was my vice chair, and that person, starting in their first year as vice chair, came to our weekly meetings
Yeah.
with our head of school. Um, that vice chair employed the same practice with the next board chair, and that board chair, I believe, started the current board chair, I believe, started as a trustee in maybe my second year as chair, third year as chair, something like that. So we also knew each other, and we three couldn't be more unalike. It just, in everything, there's nothing about any of us that is similar. And we have different backgrounds, we have different family constellations, we are of different large, maybe around the same age, within 10 years or so, but really different. And we have operated very differently according to our personalities and according to where our strengths are. But each of us, I think, has supported the prior person in just elevate, and the next person in elevating the skills and talents that they bring as a leader. And I think really being thoughtful as an executive committee too, with the other officers, around what does this board need next in terms of leadership? What is our next greatest challenge?
Yeah.
What does our head of school need in year 2 or 3 or 4 that they didn't need in a chair in the first year? So it's really that, just separating yourself, I think, from what the school needs, what the head needs. And these are really hard things to do, because often the person who ascends to board leadership is someone who has been a leader in other aspects of their own personal and professional life. And they are used to leading in a particular way that isn't necessarily the way leadership in schools evolves and shows up. So I really am, again, I'm a proponent of education for all board members, including the chair. Our regional associations have fantastic opportunities for board chairs and heads to convene and to work through case studies at times, to hear from board chairs and heads who have worked together. Sometimes you'll have the same people on a panel who have actually worked together as chair and former head, and that's always really great to hear. But
Yeah.
I do think my best resources as a chair came from our regional association. It was ADVIS at the time, in the Delaware Valley, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and a few schools in New Jersey as well. Um, I really got tremendous value in those planned programs, but also calls to the executive director when I needed when I needed some support. So I think there are a number of ways, talking to other board chairs, but like a head of school, you're in a lonely role, and you have to remember that that is part of the deal,
Yeah.
and that you are responsible for leading a board and a school through, again, some of its most difficult challenges, and in times where things just look like the sun will never set on your great good fortune as a school. And um, remembering to really cheer loudly in those moments, but also to be thinking about what might be, what potential headwinds are in front of you. And the head of school plays a huge role in supporting the chair, around trends and identifying trends, and being mindful that while the school that you lead together is independent, unique, and special, it is part of an ecosystem that a larger group of people, consumers, parents, same thing, are looking at you as being fairly similar and asking, how are you? There is no way in which you seem different to me. So really being aware that even though we're an independent school and we operate in the way that we do, we have our own history, our goals, our culture. We are part of these larger trends, and I know that as board chair, I appreciated that from our head of school, the heads of school that I've worked with when I've been a board member, in them leading us and educating us around what the needs of our school is, but the needs of all schools, and how we fit into that.
Something I've been wanting to ask you about is the head of search transition, because just that happens every year, right? You're lots of open positions, and boards are working through it. So what does a well functioning board actually look like during that process? I'm curious, like how does that help them, reset their sense of purpose? I mean, it feels like there's a lot of opportunity inside that for everyone.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about the end, right? A board's role at the conclusion of a successful search is to consider and hopefully adopt unanimously the recommendation of the search committee.
Yeah.
If you know that at the outset, you're better set up for success than many boards are as they enter that process. But that is, they are working toward a goal, and the board chair is responsible for appointing that committee, as they are for appointing all committees and deciding who sits on committees. Sometimes board chairs do that with the consultation of executive committee members or the governance committee, but they're responsible for figuring out who's going to be on that committee. They're responsible for figuring out who the chair will be if it's not them, and it probably should not be. I did not chair our search committee. I sat on the committee, but I appointed two co-chairs. And that's often my recommendation to schools, is to identify emerging board leadership or tested board leadership, and to give people the really one of the highest levels of responsibility a board can undertake. And it's also the board chair's responsibility to co-create a charge or charter for that committee. I believe that all committees should have charters that they review at the beginning of each year and each season, and their goals should flow from that. And so um, the committee needs to understand what its role is. And it's surprising how often a committee or a community will believe that a search committee has chosen the head of school, or a search committee has all the decision making power, and that there's no one else in the room. And that's just not true. A search consultant is an ideal partner for much of this work. Board chair should not have to do this alone, although there are great resources out there. NAIS guides to the search process are fantastic. And when I'm talking to a school about potentially working with them, I can tell when they've read the book because they're asking me the questions in order about what a search consultant does and what they do, what the roles and responsibilities are. And I really appreciate that. So all of that said, Peter, the board's work has to continue as a head of school is selected, and this is important in a time of transition. As the current head exits and the next one arrives, a board chair who keeps the entire board informed during the search ensures that ongoing work is not less important than the search, and identifies emerging leaders both on the committee and those who are not on the committee, sets the next head of school and board chair up for optimal success. So, I would say there are many things to consider during the search. It is very important. It's not the only important work that the board is doing. And
Yeah.
any signal otherwise is a signal to board members who are not on the search committee that they don't matter, or that the annual work of the board should not continue at a high level.
That's such a good point. That's great. I really, right. You have to keep doing all the things, even though you're going through this major process of finding your new head of school.
That's right. And again, it sets that leader up for success. Those leaders who are evaluating whether this is the right opportunity for them are
Right.
very, very keen and interested in what is the work of the board. And if every person that they talk to during their finalist visit says, well, we're really focused on the search right now, that leader says, "Oh boy!" Like they either say, "Okay, well that's great because I want you to be focused on getting me here as the next head of school," or they say, "I'm going to have a lot of work to do because this board has spent a year thinking only about the search and maybe has let some things fall by the wayside."
Last question from that I have before we begin to wrap up. So imagine a head is navigating a difficult board dynamic right now. What's the first thing they should do? Like, what would you tell that head if they gave you a call?
Well, I often say just this exactly, and I say this in trainings that I've done for different associations on the board chair and head of school dynamic. I say that the board chair and the head of school must be in lockstep in front of the board until they're not. And that doesn't mean they can't disagree even strongly, and it doesn't mean they can't share those points of disagreement once they have had to commit to a direction. But in the room, they disagree, and then they find compromise, they agree, and they commit. And they don't waver. And when that relationship is strong and based on genuine and mutual respect for their respective roles, time, and expertise, board chair and head, I'd say that boards are generally more immune to a difficult dynamic. So when people call to tell me they're in the midst of something and I tell them what that should have happened already, sometimes they say, "But I'm asking you what to do now." And I say, and I am trying to braid back the threads that may have unbraided as you reach this moment, and help them do an analysis on where the real pain points are and where they can actually still have an impact, because it's often the case that heads at that moment where they're picking up the phone to call me, they are really quite despondent. They are in a kind of a self-blame, self-critique cycle that
Yeah.
doesn't help them to show confidence and resilience, which is often what a board is looking for someone to do in the midst of difficulties. So the board chair is an important partner. If the board chair is the biggest challenge, I think there are other ways in which this HEB school can turn. It is complicated, but I would say board chairs who encourage and support their head of school in developing individual relationships and interests in other board members, they engage a partner for themselves as well in leading the board. The head of school can help you do that. You don't have to do that alone. So if that's already happened, that's really helpful. And if the board chair is the barrier to or if it feels to the head of school like the board chair is the biggest barrier to addressing the dilemma of this difficult dynamic, they do have other relationships, and there are ways to it's not like the head of school can't talk to other board members when they're having a challenge and get their advice. I think that's important. I'd say that some board members are just off, they can be reluctant to challenge or engage a board chair, and sometimes that's what's going on. The board chair may feel like this is the direction the board wants to go in and I'm doing what the board wants, but they're not necessarily getting all the information, and people don't necessarily feel like they can approach them and say, I might disagree. Sometimes board members are reluctant to challenge or engage the head of school because of their relationship as a parent, right? So the chair and the head need individual, authentic relationships with each board member. Both of them do. Both of them need individual, authentic relationships, and as they relate to governing, not just their social relationships, but as it relates to governing to lead the board effectively. The bylaws may also guide next steps if again, if a dynamic is really difficult. association EDs. I've mentioned them before. These folks are great resources. They are often former heads of school. Sometimes they've had multiple headships, and they have incredible relationships within the community. And they can say, I just had a conversation with a counterpart of yours. I'm going to ask them if they would mind if I share what's going on with them so that they can support you, because they're at phase 4 for the same dilemma, and you're at phase 1. And I would love for you to talk to that head about how they moved through this difficult dynamic. So they often have a great bird's eye view of what's going on within their association geographically and across different kinds of schools. Their teams, the people on their teams are often fantastic as well, because they have specific roles and responsibilities within the association, professional learning, and so on. I'd say, if you've got NWAIS where you are, I've got ASME where I am, they offer tremendous support to heads in challenging times, and confidentially as well. I would say coaches, you mentioned coaching, your own professional network as a head of school, and family support in your own personal life is there are no substitutes for those. And people, as much as a head of school has gone it alone and felt like they're in a lonely job, they got to the role of being head of school because of their personal and professional reputation, skills, and talents, and people are going to want to lend them a hand. I've never, in any of those circumstances where I have been asked to help a head of school, have I felt anything other than this is a tremendous humbling honor to sit with this person through a really difficult time and to feel like I made a difference just by listening, whether I offered advice or not. And then I would say professionally, a refresh and reframing in writing your purpose, mission, values, and goals for the school can be a really great exercise for you as a head of school. And to be thinking about its present and future can help start a conversation when things seem untenable with individuals on the board, because I think you're all there for that shared purpose, and it's rarely the whole board that is operating with one voice against a head or their vision. And a thought exercise, a writing exercise, a shared writing exercise is often a good reframe and refresh that helps people remember why they're in the seat, why they love the school, and why they've chosen this head of school to be their leader. So there are a number of places to go, but I would implore heads of school first and foremost to rely on their personal networks first and foremost, because you're going to have those long after you have this job, and they matter and they should endure, and to really support a school and a board in being reminded of its purpose, its mission, and its value.
This has been an episode that I think people are going to listen to a couple of times through, because there's so much like rich advice that you've offered. And so thank you so much, Staci. This has been fantastic. Before we close though, what's the best way for somebody to reach you if they want to follow up and have a conversation?
The best way to reach me is to go to drgtalent.com and to search my name and find my bio there, and find my email, find my phone number, and I answer all calls.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to link to your website from within the show notes. But Staci Williams Seeley, principal at DRG Talent, thank you again. And for those of you who are part of Moonshot Lab, hang tight. We've got more conversation ahead. We're really excited about this extended interview. So we'll get to that in one second. But first, Staci, thanks again. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been an honor.